Hi, everybody. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Robynne Pendariès. I am an ADHD coach for adults. I have always been interested in nutrition, and I consider myself a bit of a foodie. But now that my work is centering around wellness for people with ADHD, I thought it would be useful to interview a nutritionist about certain issues related specifically to ADHD. On a more personal note, my husband and daughter both have ADHD, and I have always wondered if what we are all eating, and specifically what I'm feeding them, is actually supporting their brain strengths instead of exacerbating their brain challenges. So I would like to introduce you as well to Lynn Burns, who is a registered nutritionist. And Lynn is passionate about getting people to shop, cook, and eat better. Yay. Lynn has written a book with Dr. Laura Winus, entitled Eating Well for Menopause, which became an accredited course as well for health professionals. Lynn wrote an additional book with Dr. Winus as a fundraiser in order to support cancer patients to eat well during their treatment, and that is called Recipes for Recovery. I believe you can find that on your website. Is that correct, Lynn?
Yeah, we can give the links in the notes or something.
Great, thanks. But the main reason why I wanted to interview Lynn is that she brings a special compassion to this chat about nutrition for people with ADHD, because Lynn has ADHD herself. So thank you, Lynn, for allowing me to pick your brain today. It would be great if you could give us a brief explanation of what brain health means, and specifically in relation, of course, to ADHD.
Thanks so much for having me here today. I think the menopause work really opened my eyes to a lot about how diet can help with neurotransmitters and how things going on in the brain fog and things, and realized how much that relates to other people. And it's not just about menopause, it's a wider issue. And then the ADHD link became more and more apparent. For me, I think when we're talking about brain health, we're talking about three things. We're talking about the physical health of the brain, we talk about the mental or emotional health of our brains, and we think about how well our brains are performing, or the functional health of our brains. So, and generally speaking, from a physical health point of view, whatever's good for the heart is good for the brain, but we're not really going to talk about that at all today. We're going to be focusing on the other aspects, which is more related to ADHD in particular. So I think that when we're thinking about ADHD and how ADHD affects people's lives, it's very much around the emotional and reactive part of the brain, to the impulsivity or our motivation, or how intensely we feel things. And that can be anxiety or sadness or rejection, or but also happy things, the excitement and happiness and things. We can feel things very intensely. And secondly, the aspects of mental health that centers around performance. So when we're thinking about what challenges an ADHD brain, it's quite often around focus or concentration or executive function, so our working memory and those aspects. And it's important to know that when we're talking about those things here, it's everybody benefits from understanding how lifestyle and food affects our brain health. It's not just neurodivergent. If you have a family member who is living with ADHD, then many of the aspects we're talking about just now will apply to you as well if you consider yourself neurotypical. So we talk about these things and it benefits everyone in the household. So it's not not specific. It just means that some of those benefits will be felt more, it'd be more tangible perhaps for the ADHD brain. So that's really how we'll talk about that today. Our environment and our food affects how our brain works. And I think everyone can relate to the easiest example where I think everyone can kind of relate to how that happens is if we think about the effect of hunger on us. Because I think how we feel and how well we concentrate is affected massively by hunger. So the hunger hormones that make us want to eat also are very likely to make us feel grumpy or angry, hence the term hangry. We're all aware of that, aren't we? So
love that word.
Yeah, hangry. And you also feel that your focus, it'd be harder to concentrate. It'll be harder to focus on things apart from things that might get us food. We might not be able to think of anything other than food. So the neurotransmitters are not just stimulating the part of the brain that makes us feel hungry and want to eat, but it's affecting anything about our brain that will interfere in the way of us finding food.
I have a question for you. You just said hunger hormones.
Yeah, our hunger and satiety are regulated by a number of hormones or neurotransmitters, like ghrelin or leptin. So we have one that is released that makes us want to eat, and there's one that once we've eaten makes us go, no, I'm satisfied, I don't need to eat anymore. And sometimes those can be
Interesting.
dysregulated. So sometimes people find it really struggle to manage their weight, and sometimes it's because of issues around those hormones, those or neurotransmitters. Those words can
Thank you. I
sometimes
had
be used a
never
bit
heard of that.
interchangeably. No,
Yeah,
it's
I've never
it's,
heard of
uh,
that.
it's and our gut microbiome is kind of involved in some of those things too. So we'll talk a bit about the gut microbiome at some point, because I'm a bit of a geek about that. I'm quite yeah, very
So
interesting.
is there anything else that you want to say in your introduction, or should I go on to my first question?
Well, I think really, I think it's just about, the only other thing I would say is, whilst everyone's brains are affected by environment and nutrition and things like being tired or stressed, sometimes it's likely that those things might have a bigger effect or a more noticeable effect on an ADHD brain. And I think there's an awful lot of information out there saying that certain foods and nutrients are really important for ADHD brains, as though they could be used as a cure or used as they can be used within in management. But I think the research is very mixed about that. I think we also have to understand that sometimes things that challenge us as ADHD people can sometimes take us away from eating in a way that supports our brain health. And
Hmm.
so sometimes it's less about focusing just on the foods that we should or shouldn't eat, but it's also about some of the things that, organizing your shopping list and organizing your meal times, or just allowing time in your day for things. Sometimes those things be harder for somebody with ADHD to manage. So by improving those things, you might be helping manage ADHD
So
as well.
so that resonates with me because as an ADHD coach and a previous professional organizer, all of those aspects of nutrition are very interesting for me. But we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
So I know that you are a big proponent of the Mediterranean diet,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I kind of know what it's about, but I
Yeah.
think it would be beneficial for you to explain it and why that could be helpful for people who are lacking focus and concentration.
Well, the Mediterranean pattern of eating it has the most evidence. Sorry about the bang. Has the most
Sure.
evidence for heart health. And as I said earlier on, anything that's good for the heart is good for the brain. There's an awful lot
Okay.
of parallels there. But we also know that eating patterns are very important for mental well-being and for brain health. Um, we talk about Mediterranean style of eating. I think the term implies tomatoes and olive oil and all sorts of things. Really, it's the pattern of eating. It's about lots of plants, and that's not just fruits and vegetables. That's nuts and seeds and pulses and grains. It's about a nice mixture of different fats and oils. It's about moderate amounts of dairy and meat, as well, and getting some oily fish. Um, Enjoying sweet things, but very often those sweet things are centered around fruit, and nuts and seeds as well, and moderate alcohol. That pattern can be achieved with cuisines from all over the world. I think sometimes a Mediterranean style of eating, it can be a little bit exclusive, but it's that pattern that is really, really positive. And so it's not really a diet, although it quite gets referred to as a diet. It's actually a pattern, a way of eating, and it's not just about the ingredients. It's also about the idea of focusing on the enjoyment of the food as well, and eating with intention and valuing the ingredients that you use. So it's more than just the foods, but that style, that pattern is associated with good mental health, good heart health, good brain health.
Thank you for getting away from that word diet, which I can't stand. And I've heard a lot of people say that diet is a 4-letter word. And I completely agree with that. So I like that you reframed it, even though I asked the question, tell me about the Mediterranean diet, that you said, let's talk about it as being a style of living, a style of eating
Yeah,
as well.
I think
Too.
I don't like the word diet. I think it has a lot of negative connotations for a lot of
Sure.
people.
Absolutely.
And even though
Absolutely.
the word itself actually just means what you eat.
Right.
You know, in its purest form, but it kind of has
I
been
didn't know that.
hijacked.
I didn't
It
know
has
that.
kind of
Thank
been
you.
hijacked as being it has been a thing for losing weight or restricting what you eat and or
Right.
making changing it in a way. But actually, the word diet is whatever you eat is your diet. You know,
Right.
so.
That makes sense. So can you explain just a little bit more about why having proper nutrition is so important to manage the ADHD symptoms, or I like to say characteristics?
How our brain works, how the mechanisms in our that's going on in our brain work requires building blocks. So our brain is talking to our body, is talking to each other, it's itself or communicating. It's happening with neurotransmitters and how we respond to those neurotransmitters. Whether so we talk about ADHD, we'll quite often be talking about dopamine or serotonin, and either there's maybe a lack, or maybe we don't respond as intensely as somebody else would do to a neurotransmitter. Now, neurotransmitters themselves are made from things that we eat, so they are built by combining amino acids, and they need, in the process of building those things, you need micronutrients to kind of, it's like the oil to the process. It's the you know, you need these other things to make things happen. For the classic example, we talk about magnesium being needed for sleep. That's because we fundamentally need magnesium to turn serotonin into melatonin, which is what helps us feel sleepy. So you need all the amino acids to do that, but you can't actually make that change unless you have magnesium there. So it's quite complicated. So if you're making stuff that your brain needs to make things happen, but you're not providing sufficient building blocks, then you are additionally compromising those things where we need a bit of extra help. So it's not like food is a cure. It's another element of managing it. If you are not eating well, then you are going to exacerbate your challenges and maybe compromise some of your positives. So it really is about well-being, and optimizing.
One of the things that I talk about with my coaching clients, I mean, nutrition is just one of them, but it's basically how can you create this life that fits so that these different elements, such as nutrition, are actually working for you instead of working against you. And so I see it very much as, because of executive function challenges, very often people with ADHD do have poor nutrition, and they are eating and cooking and doing and shopping in a way that is actually sabotaging any efforts that they might have to function well.
Yeah, and I think that is really true. I think understanding what your barriers are to eating better, what is it you find difficult about that whole shopping, cooking, planning process? We can eat in a supportive way, and it can look very different in lots of different people. It doesn't have, I think very often we're shown a very kind of what's the word I'm looking for, a sort of aspirational way of eating, and it's supposed to look a certain way, and we're supposed to do things in a certain way to get there. I think we have to break down some of that and say, okay, this is how I am. How can I make that better? How can I find ways around that? And it doesn't have to look like that lovely Instagram thing. It doesn't have to look like that thing that person says is so easy. It might not be easy for you, and you don't have to do it that way. It's about understanding what it is that can make things better for you and going, right, us ADHD folk, pretty good problem solvers. How can I find a way around that to make that happen in a slightly, it doesn't have to look a certain way. That's not the point. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I'm sure that what you're saying and what you're explaining is really resonating with other people who have ADHD. So thank you for pointing that out. So a lot of my coaching clients also talk about omega-3, And I'm wondering why omega-3 fatty acids are beneficial for people with ADHD. But you don't have to get into the technicals of it, but just like, because I know you like that stuff.
Yeah, I get geeky. Yeah, I know. I do get geeky. If we think about what the brain and nervous tissue is made of, it's really high in it's highly concentrated in those omega-3 fats. You know,
Okay.
the sheets that cover the nerves, it's like really high in these long chain fatty acids that you find in fish, these omega-3s, and our brain is so much of it there. They they're they are involved in a lot of the places where those neurotransmitters work their magic. So again, it's like oiling those processes.
Okay.
They're particularly important. Fats, I think we sometimes talk about fats in one great big that overarching term, but actually the structure and the length of the fatty acids, each one of them, they have different roles to play, and the shape of them is working and doing very specific things in very specific pathways. And so the omega-3s are really important for our brain tissue and our nervous tissue, and they're also really important for the immune system as well, and combating inflammation and stuff, so that they're really important. That's where that heart health, brain health connection comes in as well. So that's
fascinating. It's fascinating. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it just to be sure, because there's no such thing as a stupid question, right? The research that's been done on these omega-3 fatty acids, I assume that the research has been done on the general population. Like, for instance, you haven't found, I imagine, some kind of specific scientific experiment that was done for people who have ADHD and what works best for them. We're just assuming, we're making these assumptions, correct?
There has been some work that, in fact, I think it's probably one of the nutrients that has been studied most, and I think there is some suggestion that by having adequate levels of omega-3 does seem to make a difference. So there's lots of different studies, and the overarching thing is, yes, they are positive for ADHD people. Do we need to supplement? Well, actually, there's quite a lot of omega-3 fats available in the diet. It's harder to get your omega-3s compared to your omega-6s. So we're talking about long chain fats. You have long chain fats found in certain types of plant oils that the omega-3s are less abundant. But oily fish, egg yolks, lots of nuts and seeds, lots of plant oils can really be good sources of omega-3. So by having those in your diet and having a variety of those things really helps.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think if you are somebody who feels that you haven't got a very balanced diet and you don't think you're getting enough, I think the advice is no more than a gram per day.
Okay.
And you just have to be aware, if you are taking them, that if you're getting fish oils, then they will very often come with fat soluble vitamins, and there is an upper level of those. So if you're taking a multivitamin or something, and then you're taking a fish oil that's got fat soluble vitamins in, you could be getting too much. So that's one thing. And you can get fish oil, get the long chain fats that don't have the fat soluble vitamins in, and they're just the oils. But if you're getting a really varied diet, then it may not be necessary. But there's no side effects or negative side effects to having some.
Okay, thanks. So another besides the omega-3s, another subject that comes up very often in terms of how my clients eat is going on a high protein diet.
Okay.
Now, very often that comes up with my coaching clients who are women, because they're talking about menopause, at the time of menopause, perimenopause, menopause. But I'm really interested in this high protein way of eating and how it affects brain function and even behavior of people who have ADHD.
As I was saying earlier, I'm really sorry about the banging of the doors. As I was saying,
can't hear anything.
Can you not? Oh, that's great. That's great, because I can really hear it.
Zoom is a miracle maker.
So it's blocking out that background noise. Awesome. Anyway, no, as I was saying earlier, your neurotransmitters are built from amino acids, which are the building blocks for protein. So if you are if your diet is low in protein, then you're kind of making it harder for your body to make those neurotransmitters. You're kind of hindering it. I think one of the things that is quite true is that we don't tend to, unless we're consciously doing it. Very often we tend to eat our protein in one big hit in a day. We might have so people, if we look at, we'll get, maybe it'll be our main meal, a main lunch or a main dinner, and we'll have meat and things, or we'll have lots of cheese or whatever. But certainly breakfast can be quite a low protein meal compared to other meals, and quite often when we snack, maybe snacking is a bit more carbohydrate rich and there's no protein. The thing about protein is we can't, if we've got more protein available than we need to use, we've got no way to store it, so we will just burn it off as energy. The only store we have for protein is in our muscles. So if you spread your protein across the whole day, you are making those amino acids available for you to make neurotransmitters across the whole day. And one of the things we know when we look at breakfast studies, where we look at going to schools and we see a school they're having trouble with concentration and behavior and whatever, usually in poorer areas, and put breakfast available for the kids, suddenly their focus and attention is improved. We're talking about across the whole range, so that the ADHD kids in there will be affected and beneficially. So our concentration, the things that we need to concentrate, if we have a protein-rich breakfast, we will have a better morning, especially when you can't eat until later on in the day. There's no option for a snack or whatever. So it's about giving our body the building blocks.
Right.
And my kids have worked that out. Like if they've got an exam, they have eggs for breakfast, and they say it makes a difference. They actually notice
breakfast.
it.
Savory breakfast.
Savory breakfast.
Protein.
Just rich, protein rich. I mean, the eggs is a really good protein rich breakfast. And so, you know, one of my sons, I've got exams. Can we have scrambled egg for breakfast? Because he really does. If he's going to sit down for a 3 or 4 hour exam, it really makes a difference.
So, Lynn, what would some other protein-rich foods be then, besides eggs? You mentioned eggs.
Well, lean meat and fish and nuts and seeds and beans, pulses, soya, cheese, yogurt, and I think some meals are harder than others to add protein to. So breakfast, sometimes people go, oh, what can I do there? Well, a handful of nuts, peanut butter on a piece of toast, things like that. And if
that's helpful.
Yeah, and that kind of thing. And I think sometimes just you could add a bit of extra milk powder into your milk and make the milk a bit higher in protein. If you're not someone who likes the nuts and seeds or whatever, you can add a bit of extra protein in that way. So
thank you. That's very helpful. So I just want to shift a little bit away from the food, but this is still about brain health. I'm not shifting too far. So I'm interested to know what you think about supplements. Like, for instance, are there specific nutrients that are beneficial in the supplemental form? So again, we're moving away from getting the benefits of what's in food and a little bit more towards supplements. I don't know if it's a good thing, but I'm just asking.
I mean, we could talk about individual nutrients, but I think it's unhelpful to get too specific on individual nutrients. There's so many complex processes in the body, you can't really pick out one thing. Lots of things are working together, and I think if food first principle should be your approach. So a good mixture of nutrient rich foods, guided by that Mediterranean style of eating. Those principles we talked about at the beginning. It's not just about those individual nutrients, because the nutrients complement each other. They help each other absorb. It's the matrix of the food makes it easier to absorb things, and you'll get slightly different varieties of the same nutrient, and there's something better about getting it from your food. And there's also compounds in foods that are maybe beneficial, but we don't fully understand yet. Although you can't really extract. And when you extract and put into a pill, it isn't quite the same. I think if you're struggling to eat well, then a multivitamin may be helpful. And I think there are some studies that talk about particular minerals and things. but I don't really want to go down into that. I think keeping the focus on the whole that food first approach
Right.
is the best way. Trying to finding the things that are causing you to find cooking, shopping, and choosing what to eat hard, and working on that is definitely more important, I think.
Like your slogan, food first. I think that's going to stick in my brain, and hopefully it'll stick in other people's as
Well, I
well
hope
too.
so. I hope
So those
so.
tiny little, those tiny little slogans that are short and sweet. So speaking of that, you know, people with ADHD have executive function challenges, and this is management of time and management of space and sequencing and prioritizing, and all of these executive functions affect mealtime. And it's not even just mealtime, right? It's,
No, it's not.
planning for the meals, it's shopping for the meals, it's
Yeah,
cooking for the
definitely.
meals, it's cleaning up after the meals. But we won't go into that.
No.
So I'm wondering what advice you have. I'm sure people are eager to hear what advice you have in relation to that, to eat better with ADHD, with the challenges, with the executive function challenges.
I think that thing I said earlier about don't feel like you have to do something a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be all fresh and all organically grown and all, everything cooked from scratch. Because if you are having executive function challenges, if you do find cooking something that's a bit challenging and just a bit overwhelming, then I just feel like that's not for me. And I think that can be very off-putting. I think a simple first step is to ask yourself the question, whenever you're about to shop or cook or eat, can I do one thing to make this better?
Hmm.
If it can be something simple as, okay, you've ended up you're in front of the pizza freezer or whatever, just by looking at the labels and choosing better.
Mm.
And saying, okay, well, maybe I can share this pizza with the other person in my house, and I can get some vegetables that I could roast at the same time I'm cooking the pizza. You're upping your vegetables. You're still having your pizza. You're still having something ready made and convenient, but you're making something better. And every little thing you can make better, this principle of the aggregation of small gains is you can do it. You can do an awful lot just by doing that. Can I avoid, I don't think I've got anything in the fridge. Hang on, let's stop a sec. What have I got? Is there anything I can do? Just giving yourself a pause. You might find that you can do one thing better. Just adding some extra vegetables to a jar of sauce. I mean, that's a really good first step,
Mm.
and very accessible.
Can I just interrupt you there?
Yeah,
I really like that, because very often with my coaching clients, we talk about perfectionism. And my clients very often say to me, I suffer from perfectionism, or I'm definitely a perfectionist. And it always gets in the way. It
it
is
does.
almost never beneficial. So if you bring that to your approach for cooking and for nutrition, you're sabotaging your efforts again,
And I
so
think
I like what you're saying.
it's very easy to go, oh, I've got nothing in the house. I'm going to go and get pizza. Oh, if I'm going to get pizza, I may as well just get a big bucket of ice cream as well. Because if I've messed up, I may as well just mess up completely rather than saying, okay, I've got nothing in the house. I'm going to go by the freezer center and okay, I can get pizza. Oh, now there's a pizza there that's got vegetables on it. I won't get the meat feast. I'll get the one with vegetables on, and maybe
Right.
I can do this one thing. And that just pivoting it into a positive dynamic rather than a, oh my God, I'm so rubbish. Because I think that's another thing with ADHD folk is, oh, done it wrong again. And that the fact that you can always add something good. You can always make something better.
Mm.
And having some things, I think one of the things that I really value is lots of things in your freezer. So lots of frozen vegetables, lots of frozen individual portions of things,
Mm.
frozen ground beef that you can pour out of a bag,
Mm.
individual packets of individual portions of salmon or individual portions of chicken.
Mm.
Suddenly you've got a whole load of things in your freezer that you can use for lots of different things
Right.
and easily defrost. And if you've got those things, you're less stuck if there's nothing in the fridge or whatever. And it's the same with having different pastas and different grains and different cans of tomatoes, different cans of beans, cans of lentils, cans of things. and having a few ideas of how you can put those together really fast, because there's so many very simple recipes that require, I open a can of this, I grab a few spices, and then I've got boiled in the bag rice, and boom, I've got a curry. Or there's lots and lots of things. You won't do that every time you're having one of those days when everything is on top of you or whatever. But if you've got the ingredients and the things there, then you're more likely to do it. So by having those store cupboard things, it can make such a difference.
Yeah. I think it's important what you're saying, because I'm listening to you and I'm reminded of one of the challenges of people with ADHD is when there's just so much of a selection and there's so many decisions to be made and so much of a choice in front of them that they freeze. It's called analysis paralysis.
Well, I totally get that. If my fridge is full, I have no idea what to cook. If I open my fridge and there's like a scummy bit of carrot and a couple of odds and ends of leftovers, well, it's like, here we go, ready, steady, cook time. And I almost enjoy that. I almost enjoy that more than when the fridge, we've just been shopping and there's everything. I'm standing there going, oh, what to cook. I just don't know what to cook. Somebody tell me what they want to eat. And I never realized that until I had a diet. I was like, oh, okay, now everybody's telling me that's just absolutely normal. And it's quite intense.
Somebody please just make the decision for me. What's for dinner? This is, and I don't have ADHD, but when I hear what's for dinner, it makes me cringe. Because then I know that I have to start thinking about planning, preparing, cooking, and that whole process. And sometimes you just don't want to do it. So I imagine that people with ADHD, it's even like upping that a level, the overwhelm and the disgust or the distractions around you or the confusion, whatever, so thank you for pointing that out.
And I think things like one pot meals where everything just kind of goes in together, and you don't really need to go, well, I've got to put this in the oven at this time and I need to put that on at that time, and then I'll make sure, oh no, I know my potatoes are raw but my vegetables are soggy. And I think I think there are a lot of people with ADHD find that kind of cooking quite stressful. So
for sure,
having lots of one pot meals is a great thing. And I think that's it. Finding what you love. What do you love? What do you find easy to cook? What do you love to eat? What hacks and tricks can you use? It doesn't have to be that perfectionism thing. You don't have to be doing everything like some chef or whatever that you've watched on the telly, or that some foodie person on an Instagram is saying, oh, you should be doing this thing. Like, no, like, what do you like and how do you like to do it? And if it tastes great and it's working.
I think that one pot thing, I don't know what it's called here in France, but you can buy it anywhere. What is that called? A crock pot or one pot?
There's Instapots or just even a big cruisier. I mean, just a big pot on a stovetop, all in one rice dishes and things. And
well, but there are those Instapots there where you can actually time it. So you throw everything in, but then you can time it, right?
Oh, I have a friend who's a complete Thermomix fan, and you can even get them where the Thermomix recipes, and it just tells you, now you need to put this in and leave it for this many minutes, and it just instructs you to how to make it.
Well, I think that could be useful, for people who have ADHD, especially people with children, or who are not just feeding themselves, they're feeding a family.
I think it's
along those lines there, still, sticking with the food issue. So I have a client who was on ADHD medication for many years. And then he told me that he was actually in a pretty short amount of time, he was actually able to wean himself off the medication because he consulted with a functional medicine doctor who told him to go off all sugar and carbs. And he was actually able, by doing that, to stop taking the ADHD medication and still feel like his brain was functioning well. And so I would just like your input or your opinion or your stance about the relationship between sugar intake and ADHD symptoms.
I think it's an interesting one. I think there is a connection between sugar and dopamine. It does seem to have a role to play in triggering that reward center of the brain, and that might be more noticeable in ADHD folk. And that maybe more drawn to sweet foods. It's a kind of, it harks back to our kind of survival instinct. But if we need energy to survive, and sweet foods are really high in energy, and so you know, oh, that tastes good. Sweet foods tend not to be toxic. So, you know, from us completes. So that, you know, there is this whole, there is definitely something about that.
Interesting.
Very often sweet foods are easy to grab. We kind of associate them a bit with hunger and rewards, like going back to when we're a child. Oh, well, if you've been really good, oh, you can have some sweeties. And I think that
Right.
does sit with us. And I think that hunger and impulsivity, you know, sweet foods are very available. And if you're suddenly hungry and you're quite an impulsive person, and you just, you know, sweet foods are easy to grab. So there is definitely some connection there. And once we start telling ourselves a story that we're addicted to sugar, or that we have a sweet tooth, or that ADHD makes it more likely, then we kind of reinforce it. I don't think we have to avoid all sugar. I think lots of people, not just ADHD, people eat more sugar than they need. And I think
Right.
I think we like sweetness. We're programmed to like sweetness, but you can find sweetness in a lot of foods, like dried fruits and snacks made with things like dates. But having fiber and protein with that sweetness means they become more satisfying. The most satisfying food components are protein and fiber. Sugar isn't so filling like that. So by combining the sweetness with that thing that actually satisfies you is one way of helping manage that.
That's
And
really
also
interesting.
we can reduce that the amount of sweetness we have just by switching. Don't switch to sugar-free drinks. They're really sweet because the artificial sweetness make them just as sweet as regular drinks. Move to drinks that are, yes, lower in sugar perhaps, but actually less sweet. Reduce the amount of sugar and gradually in your teas and coffees. Eat darker chocolate. If you start reducing the amount of sweet foods that you eat, if you have something very sweet, it will be overwhelmingly sweet. And we know that you can train your palate to find sweet things, to find sweetness with lower amounts of sugar and stuff. So we can do it. And these stories where people change their diet to actually target on one thing, like it could be gluten, or it could be carbs, or it could be, when you take something out, you change so many other things.
Right.
You become much more intentional about how you eat. If you can't eat carbs, well, you can't just get up and have a bowl of cereal. You're going to have to plan to have different things. What do you replace those carbs with? Very often it's foods we should be eating more of. So it isn't necessarily the absence of the thing, it's the fact that to fill the void, you're filling it with things that we probably need to eat more, probably more protein foods. So was it the cutting out, or was it the adding in? Was it the greater diversity? Was it the more intentionality? Was it the planning? Well, yeah, we have to be really careful with these stories, because I made a choice to not eat gluten, and I feel so much better.
Right.
You're having more salads, you're having more fruit, you're having more protein, you're having more variety.
Right.
Was it the gluten that disappeared that made you feel better, or was it a better pattern of eating that came with it?
That's a very good point. Yeah. And I thank you for pointing that out, because, like you say, people tell stories. And I'm not saying that stories are false. I'm not trying to imply that. And I didn't infer that when he told me this story, but I think it's just good to be aware of things that you hear, things that you read, or it's not the whole story,
It's not the whole
basically.
story, and everyone's, what was his starting point? So he could say that, but his starting point might be very different from yours. And he's saying this thing, and then when you apply it to yourself, it may not be true for you. And so I think when we hear these stories, we have to be really careful about what message we take for ourselves personally. And I think it's very easy to decide to restrict or exclude. And there can often be negatives about excluding things. So the carbohydrate story, I often worry about that cutting out carbohydrates, because whole grains and there's a lot of nutrients that are associated with those whole grain foods and those carbohydrate foods. Our body uses starches as its main fuel source, so you're kind of reducing that as well. But the fiber, that's so important for our gut microbiome. And one of the main sources of fiber are those whole grains and those carbohydrate rich foods, if you're choosing the whole grain varieties. So, these blanket statements for our food group can be a little dangerous.
Right. And just to rebound of what you said there, if it's good for the gut, it's good for the brain too.
It is, yeah.
But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole other webinar. Yeah, a whole
But thank you.
other
So
call.
just exactly. So just, to recap, this idea about just cutting out anything, but especially sugar out of your diet is kind of also feeds into this all or nothing thinking that people who have ADHD have a tendency to implement, let's just say, which again, is not necessarily beneficial and doesn't necessarily serve them well. So thank you for that explanation. So I guess you were talking about snacking, and you were saying how, people have a tendency to grab something that's sugary because it's quick and easy. So I'm just wondering, in terms of snacking, what are some healthy options? You said, anything that has protein or fiber. Can you just give a few specific examples?
Things like fruits and nuts are really useful, because you could have a biscuit and have a bit of fruit and nut beside it, and it kind of almost like a complementary thing. Snacks don't always have to be sweet, so it could be a little bit of cheese, or it could be things like peanut butter and oat cakes, or things that have fiber, a piece of toast, a piece of whole grain toast,
Hard-boiled egg.
yeah, be it, I think, kind of step back and say, we do fall into a trap of snack foods, of what we get sold that are easy.
Right.
A muesli bar that's nutty with dried fruit is going to be better than just something very sugary like a plain biscuit. So things some of those kind of energy balls with the dates and the almond powder and things, they're really easy to make at home, but they're quite available out in the stores as well.
I think I
So
saw that recipe in your recipe for recovery booklet.
yeah, there's what is,
Yes.
we call them the amaze balls, because
Yeah.
they're dates and their oats and their almond powder with cocoa, so
Mm.
they're really chocolatey. All the sweetness is coming from the dates,
Mm.
fiber, and so they're filling, and teenagers eat them and just like them. I thought that I was taking them for it. The adults would eat them, and then they went round and all the teenagers ate them, and the adults didn't get any of them. They are really nice. If you make them yourself and you adjust the texture with a little bit of water, you can make them really like ganache. They're like almost like truffles.
Mm.
So
Mm.
yeah, and you can roll them in coconut, and you can roll them in nuts, or you can roll them in sesame, or whatever you like. So you can really
You can play with it. Yeah.
play with it.
Right. So we've talked a lot about food, and I'm wondering, speaking of drink, not about energy drinks, because I know that you mentioned that in terms of sugar, but what about caffeine? It seems like the jury is out about if you should drink it, if you have ADHD, if you shouldn't, how much. Where's the truth in there?
I think anecdotally, a lot of ADHD folk find it helps with focus, and they use it a lot to self-medicate. They enjoy it. They say it doesn't. They report that it doesn't affect their sleep, and they actually, find some people actually find it quite calming. And I think that's a very personal story. Others report that it makes them more jittery and more hyperactive or whatever. So, the jury is out. There is general guidance around quantities of caffeine per day, and it's about 400 milligrams is suggested to be the upper level for anybody.
So like how many cups of coffee is that?
That's about 4 cups of black coffee, or about 6 shots of espresso.
Okay.
And you have to remember that things like chocolate contain caffeine, quite a lot of tea, black tea contains caffeine. So it's around other things. Some soft drinks have caffeine added to them as well.
So basically you're saying that it's the same principle with the food. In other words, don't eliminate necessarily, or don't think about caffeine as being the devil. If you're going to drink it, if you feel like that's beneficial and it's not interrupting your sleep patterns, which is important, then fine, but in limitation. Is that what you're saying?
That 400 milligrams
Moderation.
is a good thing, and maybe not having. So I would personally be wary of like caffeine drinks where caffeine's been added. Quite often those soft drinks have caffeine added, and it's like there's 100 milligrams in one can. or it's 200 milligrams in one can. That's a lot in one go, and then you're going to
Right.
get caffeine in other places throughout your day, and then
Right.
you're going to go up. And I think whilst there are people say I drink caffeine before I go to bed, and it doesn't affect my sleep. I don't have any trouble falling asleep. There is evidence to suggest that even if it doesn't affect you falling asleep, it may affect the quality of your sleep that you might not be aware of
Mm.
yourself. And so there's probably something to be said for keeping those caffeinated drinks down and in the evening for a couple of hours or so before bed, at least to avoid them.
I did just read an article recently about a link between, or saying that people with ADHD are actually at higher risk for sleep apnea. And I don't know what's behind that, but I'm just thinking from a coaching point of view is that if somebody is trying to improve their sleep patterns and their sleep hygiene,
Yeah.
because they have sleep apnea, well, put all the chances on your side
Yeah.
and, and
Yeah.
reduce that caffeine
Before
intake.
bed. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
good. That's good advice. But
So
yeah.
I have a question for you. This is the last question. Last but not least, again, we could probably do a whole other Zoom on this. But I just wanted to touch on it. I thought it was important. Do you know of a link between eating disorders and ADHD?
I have read in several places that eating disorders are present in ADHD people to a greater proportion than in
Mm.
the neurotypical population, particularly binge eating disorder. So
Oh,
just
as
like
opposed to anorexia.
anorexia doesn't seem to be
Okay, that's
as
interesting.
strong. It seems to be more binge eating disorder or uh, getting, you're talking about perfectionism and talking about all or nothing approach, talking about getting very interested in and hyper focusing on a particular thing. So you can have
Right,
this scenario where people get very caught up in, they want to eat better for their ADHD, for example, and or just to be healthier, and then they're following this advice here and that advice there, and being very very literal about it, and really kind of all
right.
or nothing about it. And there is a condition called orthorexia, so people can really lose quite a lot of weight, and not, it's not anorexia because it's not so much to do with like body image, but because they're trying to follow a whole lot of rules, actually they're excluding quite a lot of different foods
Oh,
from their diet. So
that's interesting. I imagine
so
that that would cause nutritional problem. I mean, health
yeah,
problems
yeah,
in the
it
end.
it
Yeah,
really can.
yeah.
So but this is a kind of binge eating kind of thing, because some people can be very impulsive, and then they eat really quickly, and then they don't really recognize their satiety, and so then they feel really bad because they've eaten loads of stuff. And so yeah, that kind of feeling very hungry very suddenly, and just being very impulsive about what they're eating,
Interesting.
or it gives them a lot of comfort sensation, and it's a comforting sensation, and so eat quite a lot. And so
Mm,
that it is seen in a greater proportion in the ADHD population than but psychiatrists and eating disorder people would know better really how that all
right.
pans out.
So
um
I'm just curious. So is bulimia when people are actually vomiting at the end of the meal, is
yeah,
that one step beyond
yeah,
binge eating?
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that
So I thought when you say eating disorders, for instance, binge eating is considered an eating disorder, even though it's
yeah.
not that next level. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
there's
The
quite a lot of,
spectrum. Hmm.
so orthorexia is an eating disorder. We can start talking about people who they've not got a clinical eating disorder, but they've clearly got disordered eating. They've clearly got a poor
Right.
relationship with their
Right.
food.
Right.
Maybe they feel guilty about certain things, or maybe to a point that it's starting to interfere with their happiness, it's starting to interfere with their
Mm.
life, it's starting to interfere with how they shop and cook, because they're always thinking about it. And I think sometimes you have comorbidities with like obsessive compulsive disorder. You can see how that could translate into a food scenario. So
Right.
you can see how this anxiety, sometimes people are very anxious about certain things, and if it links onto food, then it could be quite um, a big issue. I think also, I think sometimes if you're overwhelmed with things and you find you can't control things, you can usually control what you're eating. And so you can develop this kind of thing. Well, this is the one part of my world I can control. And then that control gets a little bit kind of, um, it's moving in a direction that's taking you away from good health.
Right.
And so it's not really that it's parts of ADHD, which when you put it in context with, if you pair that up with some kind of relationship with food, it could make that problem, aggravate that issue. But then if that's affecting what you're eating, then you may affecting your ADHD symptoms more, and it's almost like a bit of a sort of
a vicious cycle.
cycle.
Yeah.
Self-esteem issues can make you have a role to play in disordered eating.
Right.
So there's lots of possibilities where the ADHD scenario can be, eating disorders are very, very complicated.
Right.
There's lots of stuff. It's not just about nutrition. It's very complicated, but there's a lot of things around ADHD and ADHD behaviors, which if there's other risk factors for eating disorders, can certainly amplify that. And I think that's where it is. You're not going to get an eating disorder just because you're ADHD. There's other things, but if you have a tendency towards that, it might be greater than if you didn't have ADHD.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. And I'm just thinking that I need to organize a Zoom with a psychiatrist who's specialized in that in relation to ADHD. So,
and I think if you are feeling obsessed, feeling that the food you eat and how you're thinking about food is dominating your life too much, then it's definitely something worth having conversation with your health professional, because there's so many things you can do, or people can help you with, to improve that. And even just simply using mindful eating as a way to help you be more aware of your hunger or your satiety. There's we've done a course on mindful eating, actually, just an introduction to mindful eating, just about that whole thing about being present and being intentional and taking time to sit and enjoy your food. And I think sometimes we can just not do that, and that is a really good way of just focusing on the enjoyment and focusing in on, okay, I think I've had it, I have satisfied what made me eat, and understanding how to do that. It's quite a good skill to have.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, that could be for a whole other Zoom. It's a very complex issue, but I just thought it was interesting and important to touch on that at the end. So thank you. And thank you for your time and for your expertise. And I really enjoyed getting to know you when we were preparing for this Zoom. So thank you for being on board, Lynn. I really appreciate it. And I'll put all the information about you and how you can help people in the website. It's not on the website, in the post notes, I guess you say. Cool. And so thank you again.
It's been lovely talking to you, both in the preparation and today. And I'd love talking about food, and I'd love talking about it in a way that's accessible to people, because it's so much part of our lives. It's such an important part of our lives, and we should enjoy it, and it should be a positive experience.
We should, and I do. And on that note, I'm going to go make dinner.
Yeah, I'm hungry as well now. Now we're talking about food. I need some dinner too.
Okay, bye, Lynn.
Bye-bye.